on this topic that it feels like, hey, you should have some information on this? Is there a topic you really feel like we should cover, but you don't think we have? I'd love to hear any suggestions there. Looks like the chat has gone silent, so it sounds like we've done a pretty good job covering the industry. All right. I'll ask that question again once we get a little bit more, a few more people in. But welcome everybody. Oh, Saudi Arabia. I don't know if I've noticed anyone coming in from Saudi Arabia before, but that's fantastic. The Netherlands. All right. I can't wait to take my family to the Netherlands someday. That's Chattanooga. Very cool. I'm in outside Nashville, so we're not too far from each other. Welcome, Galen, France. All right, I better stop because I'm going to miss somebody, and then I'm going to jump.
France, yeah. I'd like to go to all these places.
Yeah. Toronto. Very cool. I always try to say it like a local. I don't know. I may be just making this up in my head, but someone told me, you know, they're from Toronto if they say Toronto and leave that TO. I don't know if that's true or not, but I'll have to go there and check it out someday and see for myself. All right. Okay. I had a question. So we're going to get started in just a moment. I know we're 1 minute after, so I don't want to belabor this necessarily, but I do want to ask you a question. Love to see where you're coming in from. This is fantastic. It looks like we have people from all over the world, so really welcome that. I'm really excited to see that. I am curious. I would love to know if you feel like there is a topic out there that Greenlight Guru has not done something on that you'd really like to hear us do something on, whether it's a webinar, a podcast, a newsletter, or an article. If there's something out there that you think, Greenlight Guru, you cover the industry on all these areas very well, but there's this one area or there's a gap in your topic. So at any point, feel free to either put that in the chat or send it to me directly, whether on LinkedIn or my email. My email is etienne.nichols@greenlight.guru. My first name, last name @greenlight.guru. Feel free to send me any feedback you may have. I'd love to hear that. Okay, let's get started. Hello, everybody. Welcome. Thank you for joining us. Welcome to today's webinar, Managing Multiple Partners in Product Development. My name is Etienne Nichols. I'll be the moderator for today's session. Just a few housekeeping items before we dive into the presentation. First, I love it when people actively participate. People are already using the chat, so that's fantastic. Use the chat on the right to connect with fellow attendees and to kind of do your commentary as we go through the presentation, but always remember to play nicely. Be respectful. The Q&A tab at the very top right, if you see that, that is where you can ask questions that we will give Eric, our presenter, at the very end of the session to answer. And we may not get to all of those, but we'll try to do our best. Even if you don't have a question that you want to put in the Q&A, go ahead and navigate over there every now and then and see if any of those questions are relevant to you, because you can upvote those and I'll try to prioritize the questions that are most relevant to our audience. So go check that out. Hit the thumbs up button on questions that you think are relevant to your situation. We'll try to get those questions answered. Second, we will be sending out the full recording and presentation slides to all registrants after this live event, so watch your inbox for that follow-up email. At Greenlight Guru, our mission is to improve the quality of life through our work in the medical device industry, which is likely a shared goal of many of you here today. We host these free webinars to share valuable insights, learn from top industry experts, and showcase our industry-leading software. Our software is designed to help medical device companies bring life-changing products to patients faster, more efficiently, and with less risk. Our software suite includes solutions for product development, quality management, and clinical data management, all tailored specifically for the medical device industry. So if you're interested in joining over 1,000 leading medical device companies that trust Greenlight.guru, visit www.greenlight.guru for your personalized demo after today's webinar, and we'd love to talk to you about that. Now to introduce today's presenter, Eric Hyman. Eric Hyman is the Vice President of Engineering at HaA Medical, where he brings over 2 decades of experience in the medical device product development. With a background in mechanical engineering and a strong track record across startups and established design firms, Eric has led design and commercialization of innovative medtech solutions ranging from respiratory interfaces to surgical tools, He's also the named inventor on patents in the patient interface space, and he's known for his creative, ego-free approach to engineering problem solving. So Eric, I'll let you take it away.
All right, great. Etienne, thank you for that. Let me share.
Yeah, no, finding the share button is a little bit, and I might even be able to help you with it, actually.
Yeah, I'm not seeing it again.
Where did it go? Let me see here.
Oh, here we go. Okay.
Okay. Can anyone else hear Eric? Eric, go ahead and say something. I want to make sure. It looks like one person can't hear you.
Oh, is it okay now?
I can hear you. Yeah.
Okay.
Do you have any thumbs up from the audience? Okay.
Okay, great. All right. Let's get started here. So I'm going to start just giving you a quick background on HaA. We're a full-service medical product development company that was founded in 1999. We've been ISO certified for well over a decade now, and have an experienced team of designers, engineers, researchers, and quality experts available to help you take your product from concept to commercialization. And we're located just north of Boston. The team at HaA has developed a multitude of medical devices over the past 2+ decades, and we're excited to give back to the med device community today and share some tips and strategies that we've learned throughout the years. So what are we going to cover today? We're going to look at how to establish an effective project team with the right partners, how to optimize outcomes, align your team, and then review effective communication practices. We hope everyone watching can take away at least one tip or strategy to help you achieve success in the projects you're working on. So we've broken this down into 4 common problems that we see, and those are responsibility overlap, next phase thinking, team misalignment, and inefficient communication and organization. And we'll run through each one of those. The first one is responsibility overlap. And here's a relevant quote to start us off. I know there's strength in the differences between us. I know there's comfort where we overlap. So we need to find balance between comfort and strength. And that's true in life as well as medical device development. So med device is a complex industry. There's many different skill sets needed to successfully develop and launch a new product. The industry is highly regulated and requires special know-how to navigate the maze from start to finish. Here's a typical project we see and all the different partners involved. This example has both reusable capital equipment and a disposable handpiece. Skills are needed in the areas of engineering, design, usability, quality, regulatory, testing, manufacturing, packaging, assembly, sterilization, and that's just to get the product approved or cleared. Then you need to think about sales, marketing, distribution, post-market surveillance. That's 24 different companies that are involved in this project. And that might seem like a lot, but we routinely work with 10 to 20 different companies on large projects like this. I would urge you to think about how many different vendors, consultants, partners, manufacturers you're working with right now on your projects. 24 companies is a lot to manage, and that's difficult. So we try to streamline the number of partners that are involved in any given project. Here's an example of how that can be accomplished. Maybe you choose a contract manufacturer that can also do packaging, maybe sterilization, distribution. You choose a design partner that could design both capital equipment and disposables. And so selecting partners that can perform a variety of functions can reduce that 24 partners down to 10. So what are some considerations for streamlining partners? There's advantages, but there's also some watchouts as well. The advantages, less management stress. Each vendor or each partner would manage their own internal team, so it's less people to manage. There's fewer handoffs, and that is important because it saves time and also saves the opportunity for mistakes as you're handing off deliverables from one company to another. And some less overhead. The watchouts, there could be less specialized expertise if you're using larger companies that can do more, fewer checks and balances. And one other thing to watch out for is if you are designing a device where your partner says they've designed or manufactured something very similar, the same thing, look out for them having some what we call technical debt or copy-paste mentality, where they think your device is the same thing and may use the same processes or designs on it, when in reality there are slight differences, and that can add up to delays later in the projects. What we recommend is to reduce partners to avoid overlap, but determine what your core technology area is with the biggest risk to your project or device, and look for additional subject matter experts in that area to reduce that risk and provide oversight. Here's one tool that we use, and we'll send out a link to this after so you can actually download and edit it and use it yourself. And this is what we call a partner map tool, and allows you to compare the capabilities that you have in-house with those of potential partners. And it lets you lay out all the skills that you need to develop your device. And then you can see where the gaps are and where you have overlap. And if you start thinking about this early, it can help avoid delays later in the project. Another thing to think about when meeting your partners is to assess their personalities. And this goes both for your in-house management team and the partners. We've grouped in 3 different buckets here: the planners, reactors, and perfectionists. Planners are, just as the name says, they plan things early, they unify the team, they tend to go in parallel effort for tasks. Reactors tend to be, again, very reactive to the moment. They're influenced by what we term the power of one, which is a stakeholder, could be a physician, could be a marketing person, could be a C-suite person, and they have an outsized influence over the decision-making of the project. And you have to look out for this because, especially in a reactive environment, requirements or features will change based on what that one person says. So you really need to question that. And then there's the perfectionists, who really want everything in order before they start engaging partners, and they tend to suffer analysis paralysis because there's a lot of different information. So think about, which persona you are and which persona your partners are. And some of the typical design outcomes we see based on those personas, and you can think of this as using wooden blocks. If you have one wooden block that you stack up, it's very stable, not going to tip over. As you start adding more blocks and bigger blocks, the tower starts to get unstable and can collapse. So planners tend to have an MVP type, minimal set of features. Reactors, again, start adding features based on the power of one, and perfectionists want every feature imaginable. So we think one of the worst outcomes in a product design would be for it to break during the procedure. Think of lots of mob database entries. That would just be terrible. So make sure to keep the designs robust and manufacturable and limit scope creep as you go through the project. So some tips to select those partners. One thing we recommend is always second sourcing. So find backup suppliers, and they can help assist to shorten lead times or possibly increase capacity once you get into production if you need more quantity than anticipated. One way to find good suppliers or good manufacturers is to engage your material suppliers or distributors. A lot of people overlook this, but especially if you're working with an exotic material, say you're working with nitinol or Ultem, the suppliers of these materials know the companies that can work with these materials and can work with them well, and they can provide very good recommendation for you. And lastly, this one starred because most important, build relationships. Go to trade shows, meet suppliers before you need them, keep a list of suppliers before you need them, and make those connections, build good relationships so that when you call them up and you need something, they're going to remember who you are. One thing that we do here is we actually provide supplier certificates when we qualify a new supplier. It's kind of something nice that we do on the bonus. We print out the certificates, we frame them, we send them to them, and people really enjoy that, and it just makes us stand out a little bit. So again, when we place that phone call, they know who we are. And another thing we do, sometimes in our spare time, we make some fun t-shirts and hats, send these to people. So again, we know med device is a serious industry, and that's for a good reason. But make work fun, make it fun to work with you, and people will want to work with you, and they'll do better work because of that. Which partner size to target? So depending on the type of company you're in and the project, you may want to target a small company or a large company. Small companies tend to have quicker communications, more loyalty, but there is risk for scale up. And one thing to watch out for in a smaller company is the expertise may reside in just one or two individuals. So you have to be careful of that. In a large company, there may be more overhead. They may be slower in the beginning to get you quotes or ramp up, but they likely have more expertise in-house and a more robust quality system. Some questions to ask your partners. So we like to ask all these questions up front and then document them in these various documents along the way. IP is a good one to always ask about, especially with your contract manufacturers. Ask them if they're using any proprietary or patented processes on your device. That's important if you ever want to move your device to a different manufacturer later on. Quality, get an example of a cert, find out what level of detail they put on their quality documentation. Operations, make sure that you're a good fit for the partner that you're working with. You don't want to try to put a square peg in a round hole. So for a manufacturer, what quantity ranges are the best setup for, things like that. And then communications, how do they like to communicate? What's the best frequency? How's it going to be documented? Ask these questions up front, put them in the project plan, and then things will work out smoother throughout the project. And of course, technical skills, what resides in-house, what can they add later, things like this are always helpful to reduce delays later on. Problem number 2 is what we call next phase thinking. Next phase thinking is when a project manager is incentivized to get to the end of a phase, can complete the phase review or design review. And in doing that, they kind of lose sight of the overall project or product. And what happens is documents are finished in the phase that they're in, and then they never get looked at again. And especially important is team members tend to get siloed based on which phase they have the most involvement in. And we often hear, just get to design freeze and have that design review. But what product are we getting to design freeze with? So it's important to think holistically. So reality is made up of circles, but we see straight lines, right? Everything is connected. Projects do not move in a nice, orderly, straight line fashion. So pay attention to how things interact. This is a typical project flow we see, which is next phase thinking. You'll see that most of the development is done in series, and special skills are siloed until they're needed. And there's usually a single entity or single person that's making a lot of the planning decisions at the start of the project, and no other voices are heard. So parts of the project, such as packaging, labeling, they wind up becoming urgent problems down the line because they're started too late. And this is similar to FDA's waterfall approach. And you can see that 120 months, obviously this is a complicated project we're laying out here, but it's just going to extend your schedule. What we like to do is take a holistic view and have a multipath approach. And we actually start with what we call the all hands on deck mentality. So we have all the stakeholders that are needed at the beginning of the project, so that those subject matter experts can shed light on potential surprises or problems later on. And it gets everyone aware of unknowns early in the project. The example of packaging I mentioned, obviously you're not going to design the packaging right away at the beginning of a project, but you can ask those questions. Is it going to need to be a tray, a pouch? Is it a double sterile barrier? What's the sterilization type? Asking all these things will help prevent delays later on because you don't want to be figuring them out later. One thing to note with this type of management style is make sure your QMS is flexible to allow the parallel processes. So you need to be able to do tasks from multiple phases at the same time. So make sure your QMS doesn't say you need to complete a phase before starting anything in the next phase. And you can see here it reduces the timeline in half. So what are some tips for actually managing multipath projects successfully? At the start of the project, make sure you define user needs. That's most important. Plan out your testing, and going along with that, establish your user groups. Begin fostering those relationships with, the physician or the nurse, the tech that's going to provide feedback throughout the project. Do that up front so that once you have a prototype or once you have a design to show them, you already have that relationship and they can get back to you quickly and avoid delays. And then throughout the project, multiple design iterations in parallel, design, prototype, test, keep repeating that loop. Don't forget your risk management and continuously update your documentation and keep regulatory engaged as well. So problem number 3 is team misalignment. So if everyone is moving forward together, then success takes care of itself. It's a great quote by Henry Ford, and means that you need good alignment to have good outcomes. So how do we get to that alignment? Part of alignment is defining partner scope. So you want to set clear requirements for all your partners at the start of the project. And that forces you to think long-term instead of, again, just this single phase thinking. And you also want to avoid project start-stop cycles. And they tend to happen when new information is uncovered and new decisions need to be made in the project. So the more you define up front, the less surprises you'll see later on and the less often you'll have to stop. And you also want to talk to your partners and define what success is. And then also that could reveal costly out of scope work. So depending on the company size and structure you have, some projects might have multiple managers, so we wanted to cover that here. They might all be done by one person in smaller companies, but it may be 2 or 3 in bigger companies. So the product manager tends to manage the scope of the product and more of a marketing role. The program manager manages the strategy of the complete product portfolio, and they tend to set the priorities of the projects in that portfolio. And then the project manager, who leads the team, manages the projects and the partners. So the one thing all these managers have in common is the user needs of the device. So again, really important to set those user needs up front and make sure all the different management from either internal or your external partners are aligned on those user needs. Because you really need somebody who's intimate with the details, kind of in the trees, so to say, somebody who keeps the system level in mind or the forest, and then somebody who knows the path out of the forest so the team doesn't get stuck and they can get the device to market. So what are some steps to achieve alignment? The first one is we like to do an alignment exercise in the beginning of the project to make sure everyone's voice is heard. 2, which is super important, is active listening. Make sure you listen to your partners throughout the project, really listen to them, and that'll help avoid delays. Celebrate small wins, that helps motivate the team and maintain that motivation. And as a leader, you have to create the conditions for great things to happen. You know, don't just tell people what to do, give them an environment where they can do their best work. And then don't forget why we're all here. You know, we're here to help patients. Reiterate why you're building the device often throughout the project and make sure they don't lose sight of that ultimate goal. And that will help maintain motivation, because we know project cycles tend to be quite long in a medical device. So the team alignment exercise that I mentioned, the goal is to reveal questions at the beginning of the project and lay out the process by which the answers to the questions can be determined. So a lot of times there's a lot of questions at the beginning of the project, and we try to challenge any assumptions people have on the answers to those questions, and also reveal what those sources of informations are. And then what's the team's confidence level in those sources? Because we tend to see, you know, where are your requirements coming from? Where are the user needs coming from? What research was actually done? What questions still remain? And we tend to see that companies have a certain dogma that everybody believes, but no one knows why. And this exercise questions these so-called facts. And it's very eye-opening that we find in the beginning of projects. So it's very useful to do. Create your quality agreement at the project start. So these are the sections that we use in our quality agreements. It's most important to figure out, you know, what quality systems are you working with, who's responsible for certain requirements of Part 820, ISO 1345, who's going to be using their design controls and risk controls, what type of QMS. So lay out all these things up front. And one thing to watch out for here, and this is for all your agreements and contracts, is that people tend to not read these things and just sign the documents when they're in a happy mood. And then they tend to enforce documents and scrutinize every word when they're mad. So plan for this downside and this risk in these documents and make sure that you have yourself covered. So this is a typical flowchart of deliverables when there's no upfront planning. So you have many companies working in many different QMSs. And the problem with this is you have a mix of file names, numbers. It's harder to find things, harder to organize. Parts get renamed or numbered at the manufacturer. Approvals are scattered in different systems, difficult to track. And you have different formats and content for everything. So it becomes quite chaos at the end of a project. So what we like to do is try to simplify this. This tends to be for a larger company that has a robust QMS, so the spec developer can do most of the work in their own QMS. And we find that this works well. Make sure that kind of all the drawings and all the design documentation are on the spec developer format, because you really want to control that data, especially if you're a smaller company and maybe you're looking to get acquired later on. The more of that data, the more of the DHF and the DMR that you control, the more value it adds to your company, just like IP does. And also make sure to plan for how manufacturing documentation is going to fit into your QMS. Likely you won't be able to do everything in your QMS, and you'll need input from your partners on many documents. So another thing to make sure of is if you have to train your outside partners on your procedures, make sure you do that and you have training records in your QMS for that. A hybrid approach that more mid-sized companies take is a blend of control, where the spec developer has some of the Conta DHF in their system, and then the contract manufacturer has some in their system. And this tends to work well as long as you're organized. One thing to make sure, if you're blending DHFs into one final DHF, make sure all of your specifications, your user needs, risk management, all of that is aligned between the two partners or multiple partners before you get going. And then lastly, if you're a really small startup company and maybe you don't have much of a QMS, there are some larger size contract manufacturers that will create and control the entire DHF and DMR for you. And this works pretty well in some situations. One thing to note is even if you go this route, you'll likely need some documents in your own QMS, especially planning documents, to make sure you're planning out what the contract manufacturer is doing. And then the last problem, number 4, is inefficient communication in an organization. So a great quote by the famous Mike Tyson here: everyone has a plan until they get punched in the face. So hopefully no one out there has been punched in the face over a development disagreement. Luckily, nobody here has. However, there are certain things like a failed DV test or a big supplier delay that feels like a punch to the face. The key is that plans are going to change. They always change, and communication in these times is critical. So what are some strategies for effective partner communication? So the first one is user needs. Make sure that everybody on the team, even people that you don't think that need to be aware, know the user needs, make sure they all know the user needs. Make sure they know the procedure. Make sure that everybody is aligned on how the procedure goes and how the user needs work. What we tend to do is create a process flowchart right up front, and this goes along with visual aids. So a process flowchart is great to get the team aligned. A process flowchart with pictures at every step of the way is even better, and a process flowchart with videos is best. You really want everyone to know the context of the device use, and it will just make design and development much easier. Another thing that we like to do is at the beginning of the project is start a list of terms and share that with the whole project team. Use images and videos if you need to describe these terms. Some of them can be, what are you naming the different components of the device? Make sure you're all in agreement on that so everybody calls different parts the same thing. Also, as we all know, there's a lot of different medical terminology, and even if you ask 2 different physicians of the same procedure, they may have different terms they use for the process. So make sure you align on that, get some terminology down and stick with it, and then update it throughout the project. It'll make things a lot smoother. And then in terms of the user needs, obviously the requirements stem from them, And this is one of the most difficult parts of developing a medical device, is turning the user needs into requirements. And we know that's difficult, and physicians, they know what they need, but they can't exactly verbalize how that translates into a requirement. They're not going to know exactly what force requirements are there. So you really want the team aware of those user needs, because we see it often actually that devices are designed to meet the requirements, and they do meet the requirements, but they really don't meet the user needs. And then there's a lot of backtracking, and it causes delays. So really make sure everybody understands those user needs. Then establish a single point of contact if you can for your partners. It helps for efficient decision making and efficient communications, but also have a backup contact, because obviously people are going to be away on vacation or out of the office. And this is especially important if you're dealing with a smaller company, a smaller partner, because you may be dealing with the president of the company or maybe the vice president, and they're going to get busy running their company. So you want to make sure you have a backup to communicate with if you have some questions. And then lastly, over communication is usually okay. We tend to over communicate, but check with your partners on communication styles first. And some strategies for project scheduling. We see all the time, we see these big, beautiful MS project schedules at the beginning of a project, detail every task needed from start to finish. And those are great, but usually a month or two into the project, they sit unchanged, collecting dust on a server somewhere, and then they're not used for the rest of the project. So we find that's a big time sink and generally wasted. So what we like to do is break down schedules into smaller mini projects. Maybe they're agile sprints, maybe they're just a month long or a 2-month long project that have very clearly defined deliverables and sets of tasks. And you want to make sure those milestones and those deliverables are clearly defined and agreed upon between your partners. And then we do lay out the rest of the project, because you do want that overall view and timeline of the full project, but lay it out with diminishing detail. So as you get further along, you don't need the individual tasks later on in the project. You'll fill them in as you get closer. But make sure you have those milestones marked. Next thing is obviously make sure that it's shared. Keep it online in a place everybody can access it. And then most importantly, make sure you update it, because if it's not updated, it's not a very important or useful document. Another thing we like to do is put milestone meetings in the schedule early, even if they're later in the project, especially if you have key stakeholders that tend to get busy. Schedule those early, get it on their calendar. We know that they're likely going to change, but at least they've blocked out time early on, so you know that they'll be available later. So deliverable approvals and transfers. The time it takes to close out a phase or project can be reduced if you determine upfront who's required to review and approve each of the deliverables, and then also how those deliverables are going to be shared. And how we expedite partner approvals, we use the Greenlight Guru system, but obviously you can do this in other QMSs as well. We like to invite our partners in as light external users, then they can view documents and sign off on them. But just make sure that your partners are available and they can approve change orders as a reviewer. They can complete trainings if they need to be trained on your QMS. Again, that's important, have those training records, and then they can view the shared documents that they need. The main thing, as I touched upon before, is ensure that who's ever reviewing or approving your documents actually knows what they're approving. We see it all the time that everybody's in a rush and they just sign off on things. Make sure they're actually reading it and understanding what they're reading. In terms of organizing files and folders, decide on a central storage location, whether that's SharePoint or Box or Dropbox, whatever that is. Establish that folder structure up front at the start so everybody can find things and knows where the documents will be stored as they're populated. And then ensure that everybody has the correct access and visibility. In Greenlight Guru, we use tags and shared folder views, which we find helpful. So we tag things by phase, and then it's easy to find phase 1 deliverables, and then different folder views to make organizing easier. Another tip is try not to have multiple copies of the same document. We do see this a lot with external partners where they'll have kind of their internal SharePoint where they'll have the document, and then they'll have their external share where they share with the rest of the team, and they're two different copies of the same document, and then that gets messy later on. Most of the current share software like SharePoint or Dropbox, they have revision control built in, so there's really very little risk of losing things. So we find it's helpful to have one shared document where everybody's working in, and then you're not getting confused later on. This is also important with CAD files. If you have a PDM vault, let's say, and you can invite your external partners into that, that's best practice. You really want to have one source of truth, especially for CAD and drawings documentation of the design. So you're not running around with different versions or different documents of the same thing. Consistent numbering and naming. So you want to make sure that you agree on a convention for deliverables at the start if you can, and stick with it throughout the project. And again, this is especially important for CAD for part and drawing names and numbers, because you really don't want to be changing those throughout the project or changing how you name things or number. It just makes it harder to find things. And especially talk to your contract manufacturers about this, because most contract manufacturers are going to have their own internal system on how they number parts and how they name parts. So if you can, try to sync those up. If not, make sure you know how things are being renamed or how things are being traced back to the original source. And assign deliverable IDs at the start of the project, and just make sure it's understood by all of your partners. Train them if necessary on your procedures again. This is one tool. Again, we'll have all these tools available to download after, but we use this to keep everyone aligned and aware. And this is a deliverables tracker. So it's an Excel spreadsheet. We split it up by phase. It has the deliverable, the name, which partners are creating the documents, which need to review it, what the status is, and where you could find those documents. And this helps align the team on what's required from a documentation standpoint and where everything's located. So you can easily just go back to this one document and find where all your deliverables should be. You can also add reminders to review completed documents as needed. Remember, your documentation is not static. You should be looking back and updating these documents as the project goes on. And this also helps reduce burden on the project manager and really has a one single place to track approvals. So we find it helpful. And this is the same thing, but if you're working out of multiple quality systems, maybe you have two DHFs in the beginning that are going to be combined later on. Again, this can help you actually know which DHF each deliverable is in, and then easily find it in its location. Another tool we use that we love is a prototype tracker. This helps us plan and manage prototype fabrication. So this is one thing that tends to get away from people, is that they don't realize how many different prototype iterations they're going to have at the beginning of a project. So they're not tracked as well as they can be. This lets us track by activity, and most of the activities are going to be testing, but some may be for marketing samples or other things like that. So we're able to track when these prototypes are needed, who's responsible for it. Likely you're going to have multiple manufacturers manufacturing multiple parts for your product. So they need to be all in sync of when these things are needed, when they'd be needed at the final assembly manufacturer. Whether you need packaging, sterilization, all these things can be tracked there. What drawing number, rev, so you have traceability. And then you could comment on, if it was tested, what the test report is, things like that. And then and this helps reduce waste and also helps you plan the testing out in the beginning. Some other tips with prototypes is always make more than you think you need, because they always get used. It's better and it saves time to have more than you need than less than you need. The other thing is, if you can, send the actual physical prototypes to all of your partners involved in the projects. It just really helps to see it in person and to have it in their hand. And it really helps save communication mistakes later in the project when they really didn't understand something by just looking at a drawing. having it in their hand. And the same goes for if you're on a 510K pathway and you have a predicate device, or maybe you have competitive devices. Try to get a bunch of those and send those out to your vendors as well. Make sure they understand what features and specifications that you need to meet in your device and which ones you're either approving on or making different, so that they really understand how that works. And the other thing with predicate devices is we see this a lot. Don't assume because some other company made that predicate device, you'll be able to make it in the same way. You may have a device that's from a large multinational. They may make tens of thousands of these or more, and you don't have that scale to support those processes. Or they may have taken 10 years to develop a certain manufacturing process that is proprietary, and you may not be able to replicate that. So again, bring these devices to your manufacturers, discuss this with them, make sure they have the processes or the capabilities to repeat some of the things that you need to do for your device. And then the last tracker we use is a decision log. So we use this to track and evaluate decisions. And this is really helpful. This is probably the hardest tracker to use. And the reason is, as many of you probably know, you might go through a day and make 20 different decisions on the design or on testing or something around the device development. So it's really hard to stop and say, oh, I made a decision, let me track it. But this gets you thinking about it, especially the bigger decisions that impact maybe a feature or the design path that you're taking. It really helps to just jot down that decision, who requested it, and then what impact that has on the different partners, right? If you need to redesign a housing, maybe you need to create a new injection mold tool, that's going to impact your contract manufacturer. Then you have to think down the line to testing. Maybe that impacts how you test it. Maybe you need new test fixtures. And before you actually go through with the decision, this really helps you look at that impact and also the impact on your schedule, on your budget, whatever is most important to your project at that time. And we find that this allows kind of less backtracking because we all have limited memories. You might get far down the road of a design decision of a path, and then you forget why you made that decision back in the day, and then you can go back to this document and it could shed some light. And it also helps organize your DHF as well and reduce delays. So our keys, again, to successful collaboration. One is your partner selection, leverage your existing network, select partners early and ask relevant questions. Planning, make sure you establish your partner scope and responsibilities early, try to tackle activities in parallel to save time, and really take the time to do your planning well. And then communication, that's the most important key. That would be the biggest key here. Establish that point of contact, log your process, ensure that cross-partner visibility throughout the project, and then determine, do we need weekly, bi-weekly meetings? Do we need progress reports? The meeting cadence is usually determined by the stage of the project and kind of the overall communication plan. So there's not one set practice that works for every situation, everybody, but talk to your partners, ask them how they work, how are they most efficient? And if you get all these questions out front, that's going to help later on in the project. So to recap the solutions to common problems, we have responsibility overlap. So streamline partners where possible, ask those strategic questions in the beginning of the project. Next phase thinking, try to tackle activities in parallel, select those partners early, and make sure your QMS is flexible enough to handle working in different phases at the same time. The team misalignment problem, establish that partner scope, your points of contact, define the decision-making roles, outline your deliverables and what systems they're going to be coming from, and try to do that team alignment exercise. If you need help, we can help you on that. It really works well to uncover questions in the beginning of projects. And then inefficient communication organization. So again, central accessible location for all your files, plan the approvals ahead of time, and then if you can, try to log that decision making. That will help later on. So what are some next steps that you can do tomorrow? First is make sure your team is aligned. Make sure they understand the user needs. That's paramount in making sure that you have a good product at the end of the day. Download the trackers we've made available, monitor the progress, monitor decisions, use them however you wish, edit them, make them your own. And then if you're earlier in the project or even later on, create that partner map, and it'll allow you to visualize the capabilities that you have and that you need. And with that, I thank everyone for watching or listening in the background, and really urge you to reach out with any questions. We're here to help. Our president, Steve Lepke, is the most generous person I've ever met, and he really just wants to help. So give us a call, give us an email. We'll help you in any way we can. And if we can't help, we probably know somebody else who can, and we'll point you in their direction. So thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much for the informative presentation. Really appreciate all the things that you shared. Sorry, I just cut out for just a second.
Sure.
So we do have some questions from the audience, and those of you who are listening, if you haven't gotten a chance to check out the Q&A, go check that out and upload any relevant questions. Click that thumbs up button if there's a question you specifically want us to ask, or go ahead and put those questions in there that you want us to ask. Okay, first off, let's talk about supplier risk management. I think you mentioned a little bit about this, but Nancy asked about suppliers risk management, ISO 14971. When and how do you recommend to include it in the design control? I assume the design control process.
Yeah, so obviously risk management is important. You definitely want to discuss this upfront with your suppliers. If you're going to be just working out of your quality system, then you'll generally use your templates, your risk analysis, your FMEAs, things like that. Where it usually gets some crossover is with the manufacturing side. So generally, the manufacturing partners will work on the PFMEA. You might have a usability partner that's going to help work on the UFMEA. So just ask these questions up front, determine what makes sense for you in terms of what quality system you need to work on or out of, but just make sure everything's aligned. So like your risk regions and your harms list and your severities, make sure you define that up front, and then everybody's using that same base documentation for your risk management.
Okay. Yeah, great. That makes sense. All right, let's go to another question. Galen asked the question, have you got suggestions on managing the level of quality, transparency, and communication planning for companies? I found this to be particularly difficult with smaller companies who are working with partners who aren't themselves under a 1345 framework.
Yeah, great question. It is difficult to work with some suppliers or partners who are not ISO certified or they don't have processes in-house. What we tend to try to do is steer as many processes as we can to the spec developer under their quality system, and then obviously talk about how the things from that partner are going to be documented. Make sure you plan out what they're going to document and then how that is going to get, usually that the documents from that company would then get imported into the QMS of the spec developer or the overall managing QMS. So you want to lay out, again, that's why you want to lay out what the responsibilities are in the beginning and what the scope of each partner is. So you'll know which deliverables they're responsible for, and then you could determine how those deliverables will work under your QMS.
Yeah. And I love that you brought up Greenlight Guru using a light user to be able to come into the system and see the things that they specifically need to view. I don't hear a lot of people about using that functionality, so I'm glad you guys are using that. It's cool.
Yeah, we find that very helpful because, again, you might have suppliers where they don't even have their own QMS, but they're making a part for you, but you want them to approve manufacturing documentation, and it's all in your system, and they're trained on your processes, and then it's all above board and level. So.
I don't want to take up a lot of the time, but there was something that you said that I thought was really it was funny, but it was true. When you're managing those personalities, when someone is mad, they're more likely to reject a document. When they're happy, they're more likely to accept. And I thought, interesting. That's maybe if I want more of a red line or more of a review, I'll make them mad before I hand it off to them. But anyway, it's just nobody's ever verbalized that, but it's absolutely true. I thought that was interesting.
Yeah. People forget that, and then they think everything's going to be great at the end of the day, and they're going to have their manufacturer for the rest of the life of the project. But things happen, there are breakups between companies, and you have to make sure that you're protected if that was going to happen.
Yeah, absolutely. And those are humans you're working with, so don't ever forget that. Okay. Thomas asked, any advice on how to cooperate with a partner on how to incorporate their software or hardware module, which may contain proprietary technology from a risk management perspective?
Yeah, so this is another great question. And we see this both on an actual part, like a module, hardware, software module, and we also see it from a process standpoint, which is even more common, that a manufacturer may have a process that's proprietary or maybe protected under IP, and they're not gonna let you see it. So we've been to plenty of manufacturers, and they will not let us in the back room, and they just come out with the part and say, here it is, but we're not going to tell you how we made it. So it is difficult. Again, you want to get these conversations out in the open and get a feel for them. What we tend to do in these situations is we put more of the burden of that risk management on the manufacturer or the supplier of that module, because obviously they know what's inside of it, they know how it's made, so they can provide at least some level of risk management and show you that they have mitigations for those. And it may not be the specifics you're looking for, because that would reveal some proprietary technology, but at least they've gone through the process and recognized any risks and then showed you that they're mitigating them in some way. So you want to have some documentation to that effect. They can say, this is proprietary, so I'm not going to let you know how we did this, but here's the risk level that we assign to that, and here's a mitigation we have to work on that.
Okay. Yeah, I can see that being tricky. That makes sense.
Yeah, okay. That's one of the most trickiest things that we deal with, kind of on a pretty often frequency. Yeah.
Yeah. Would there be additional validation on your side, or do you, I suppose, or
again, it depends what the provider can provide. It gets really tricky if you're purchasing a component that is proprietary and you don't know what's inside, and the manufacturer is maybe a big multinational manufacturer, and they're not going to really provide you with any documentation on it. So that you have to really do your best to try to do additional testing, make sure you have that covered if something went wrong with that component.
Yeah, that is one of the difficulties in the medical device industry, is so much low volume. You don't have a lot of sway in those things. But.
Right.
Richard asked a question. I really want to know the answer to this one. This one's interesting to me personally, but any advice or comments for integrating drug product partners for a medical device drug product combination product? And maybe we'll just, I don't know, for kicks and grins, we'll call the PMOA the primary mode of action being the drug side, or I don't know if you, Richard, you want to weigh in on the comments as to whether who you're talking about leading this, or maybe it doesn't matter. I'll let you answer, Eric.
Yeah, we're actually working on a combination product right now. So this is timely. Most of the time we see kind of the drug leads the development, because that's really, like you said, the method of action, and the device kind of comes along for the ride. But also that means that a lot of times the device kind of plays second fiddle and gets overlooked a bit, especially from the usability side. So you have to watch out for that. If you're more on the device side of it and you don't know the drug side of things, would definitely look for partners that are in the pharmaceutical industry and have that experience on getting a drug combination device to market, because the pathway is much different. And
One of
then
the things,
also,
oh, go
no,
ahead.
sorry. No, I was gonna say also the mix of kind of quality systems and their requirements is different as well. So again, make sure you have these conversations up front and determine who's going to supply what and how, when you do testing of the final device with the drug, who's responsible for those deliverables and how are they going to integrate with the final regulatory package that you're going to need to provide.
Yeah, it seems like, I mean, there's almost a language barrier at times in developing those user needs and then eventually merging those DHFs. I don't know if you want to speak to that any.
Yeah, it's not easy. Again, I think more conversations, the more planning,
Yeah.
the better. And the more, what we find essential is really try to get all those experts in the room at the beginning, because they're going to be the ones asking the questions that you're not going to think of. And then that's going to save you time later on. If you wait till you're halfway down the path, then that winds up causing problems and causing delays.
Okay. Yeah, there's a whole lot there. So drug accommodation product is kind of a topic in and of itself. So maybe we'll have to talk more about that at some point. Jenny asks, I think this one's interesting. Can you speak more to how you use persona identification as part of your partner management strategy? And I might even go upstream of that is how do you identify the persona identification or go through that personality assessment that you were kind of talking about?
Sure. Yeah, I mean that comes from, I think, more of our usability work. We try to define personas and categorize people by the way they work a little bit. What we tend to do, and this might not work for everyone, we tend to do what we call the first date rule, where we'll start off with kind of a mini project with a client or with a vendor, get them to do essentially a little part of the project before committing to the whole project. And that really lets you see how they work, because sometimes people say things and then they really don't live up to what they're saying. Their actions don't match up to what they're saying. So you can do some quick tests, determine how responsive they are. Or do they come to meetings? Do they read the documentation you send? That will get you a really good quick idea of how they are to work together, and that will let you know kind of how you need to manage them. But yeah, once you learn the personalities of your partners, obviously this is more of a psychology based thing, but you want to manage them differently. So if you have somebody who's a planner or perfectionist, if you know that up front, you can tailor your communications and your management to kind of satisfy their needs, because everybody's going to have different needs and you want to keep everyone happy. You may have some suppliers that have certain pain points or certain things that set them off, and you want to know that and be able to work around that.
Yeah, I love that. And I think, it's a mistake to disregard psychology, especially when it comes to project management, because it's, like I said earlier, you're dealing with humans, so it's part of it.
Right.
It's kind of like forgetting physics and you're talking about material specifications. So
Right. Yeah, a lot of people do just not incorporate that, and then they have what you don't want is kind of friction between your partners, right? You want to have a cohesive team that works well together, and to do that, you need to be nice to each other and need to work well together.
yeah. I'm going to go ahead and stop at that point. I know we didn't get to all of the questions. We'll be forwarding those on to Eric. So if he and his team are able to get to them, they can, hopefully they'll be able to maybe respond to the last few that are there. But I want to thank you all for coming to this webinar. I do have a quick survey that I'm going to launch right now. So if you're able to answer that survey, that'd be very helpful in the future. But for now, thank you all for joining. Eric, thank you so much for the valuable session. Thank you for answering all the questions. One of the questions was about how do we get the external resources? You will be getting a follow-up email, so we'll be including that in the follow-up email. Whether, I don't know if it's going to be a link or an actual attachment, but just keep an eye out for that email. And if you don't see it in the next few days, reach out to me or help@greenlight.guru, and we'll do what we can to help you and make sure you get those resources. So on behalf of Greenlight Guru, thank you for attending today's webinar and have a great rest of your day. See you all later.
Thanks, everyone.